Alright, what do we have this week? Indie game breaks digital stores, news about Valve games, Ubisoft hides sales data, all that and more on this week's Old Man Rages at the News for the 8th of September 2025. Before we get into this week's topics, hit the like and subscribe button if you enjoy the content. And kicking off this week with what could be described as the funniest thing that happened this week in gaming, SIlksong managed to obliterate Steam. That was the original title of the segment, but then I saw it took out the Xbox storefront and Nintendo's eShop too. What a way to prove my point that gamers just want a good game. Now, some context for 3 people who woke up from cryosleep because their ship crash landed. SIlksong is a sequel to Hollow Knight, and it was anticipated since February 2019. Yes, 6 years of anticipation. Mind you, this started out as a DLC for the game, then turned into a full-blown game in and of itself. To give you an idea how big this is, while writing this, there are more than 225k players playing and a peak of 587k over the release weekend. Now, if all of those people hit the download button at the same time, it will definitely cause the hamsters that run Steam servers to struggle. Insider Gaming also stated that they have seen reports that the eShop and Xbox Store are also suffering, and after a bit of digging, I can confirm that there were indeed problems with the 2 platforms. This is such a big deal that even the BBC made a report on it. Now, of course, there will be people online who are not happy with the game releasing without an announcement date, but to these people, all I'm gonna say is, get good, scrub. Moving on, the Left 4 Dead creator is making a 4-player co-op shooter. In a Reddit post, Mike Booth wrote, "I'm excited to share that I'm working on a brand new project. A 4-player co-op shooter built on the foundations of what made Left 4 Dead special. If you enjoy the teamwork, tension, and replayability of my past games, you'll probably find this one interesting. It expands on the co-op formula in ways I've wanted to explore for a long time." He also shared a link which invites players to playtest the game in order to help him share the game. However, the amount of players will be limited. The mods of the Left 4 Dead 2 subreddit confirmed that it is indeed the real Mike Booth. And in more Valve-related news, fellow YouTuber Tyler McVicker says new Team Fortress game is progressing. Or is it? Quick note, he is the one who uncovered Half-Life Alyx and Deadlock before it was publicly revealed. This all started when a Reddit user uncovered a script, in quote, TF, within the source compiler.ddl of Valve's hero shooter Deadlock, and McVicker verified the codename was new and it appeared in both Deadlock and Counter-Strike 2 inside Source Engine's data. He also pointed out 2-letter tag seems to serve as a development identifier. McVicker also dismissed the notion that TF represents Source 2 port of Team Fortress 2 and argued that if Valve were simply shifting TF2 onto Source 2, they would use a more descriptive tag like TF_import. This is all just speculations, and remember, Valve has a history of cancelling or shelving games, even ones that seem promising in early builds. Deadlock itself began as Citadel and it was transformed multiple times before release, so until Valve doesn't announce it, everything should be taken with a grain of salt about TF. Then again, if you wanna put your tinfoil hats on, Team Fortress 2 has a picture of a coconut, their coconut JPG, that if you delete it, the game just refuses to start. If you take that into consideration, then it's possible that it's just a smokescreen from Valve. Or I could be losing the plot. Both are a possibility. Moving on, Blizzard filed a lawsuit against the owners of Turtle WoW. Yes, they're afraid of a private server now. For some context, Turtle WoW is a fan-made expansion for Vanilla WoW that delves deeper into exploring the original lore of the game. Blizzard alleged in the lawsuit that Turtle WoW is using Blizzard's artwork, trademark, and official code. And while I do agree that this is within the legal right to file a lawsuit to protect their copyright, there are other ways of getting out of the situation. Not only that, but the project was sustained only through donations, and it was free to everyone since it released in 2018. And they kept working on it while choosing to go a different route to show what else could have been done with WoW. Now, those people who will lose access to the WoW would even boycott Blizzard more. Think about it. You don't like the road the game goes down, and all of a sudden, there's an alternative to which you find interesting. Then, the game developer comes in and says, no you don't. You're not gonna like that now, would you? Now, let's be real here, this is a lose-lose situation no matter how you see it, but if someone at Blizzard thought maybe we should hire these people, give them more resources and free reign to do an alternative story to retail, they would have at least won some PR points, if nothing else. Moving on, PlayStation 5 is too expensive and a barrier for Capcom. In a recent interview with Nikkei Gaming, Capcom president Haruhiro Tsuchimoto acknowledged that Monster Hunter Wilds met its goal of 10 million sales in a month, but this was achieved in spite of, and I quote, unexpectedly large barrier that was the PlayStation 5 price tag. He also confirmed that Sony's console is considered the main platform for the game and said the console costs about £403 when you factor in the cost of software and monthly subscriptions. It comes to about £503 at the time of purchase. This is not an amount that can be easily reached, especially for younger generations. This situation is not limited to Japan, but is similar overseas as well. Hey Capcom, here's an idea. How about trying to make a good PC port that doesn't run like crap on your minimum system requirements? I'm looking at you, Wilds! And in other news, Skyblivion's 2025 release goal is, and I quote, pointless and unachievable, claims longtime dev, then accuses two leads of rushing the mod out. The claims came from D. Kyles on X, and it's a very long read, so I'll cover only the important parts. He wrote, in the last few months, it has been impossible for me or other developers to convince Rebel's Eyes that this release date is not possible. After a last-ditch effort to ask one of the lead devs, who was also stressed by the project's mismanagement, to voice the concerns, only for them to be ignored and forced to leave too. I felt like my time at Skyblivion had come to an end. He also accused Rebel and Heavy Burns for working with the goal of the team's efforts being, quote, rushed out the door to meet a, and I quote, pointless and unachievable release date. Not only that, but a few days later he confirmed to RPS that he wasn't part of the Skyblivion team anymore. Take this with a grain of salt since they didn't write on their Twitter, but he wrote, my departure and choice to write my statement came when I discovered that another one of our longtime volunteers, Kettlewitch, had left over the same issues. This was the push for me to finally leave, since it seemed like any attempt for me to do the same would just be met with the same apathy. I know the Skyblivion project lead, Rebel's Eyes. This I know to Skyblivion's project lead, Rebel's Eyes. This has come out of nowhere, but there were more than enough warning signs that were ignored. If our leaving shocks them into listening to the rest of the developers' first feelings, then some good will have come from it. And continuing the trend of leaving game development, another developer leaves Heaven Studios who work on Fairgames. Go woke, go broke! Eagle-eyed, as the article puts it, fans used their powers and learned that another high-ranking departure occurred at Heaven Studios, with the game director leaving the company. The news came just 3 months after the studio founder left the company too. Kids, this is what we call development hell. This was discovered by the user Civil-Pineapple on the PlayStation 5 subreddit by looking at Daniels' LinkedIn, showing that he left Heaven Studios last month and joined as a creative director at Warner Bros. Games Montreal. Now, if this doesn't spell trouble for Fairgames, 2 high-ranking departures within a span of 3 months, then I have no idea what people are gonna expect from Fairgames. I mean, at this point, just cancel it. Write it off as a tax loss and make sure that IP never gets used again. Moving on, Microsoft is investigating crashing and missing pre-orders as Gears of War Reloaded slumps to mixed rating on Steam. Microsoft said that it's, quote, aware of crashing issues with the newly released Gears of War Reloaded and confirmed that it is investigating. The game also isn't looking good, with crashing, and more crashing. That they hopefully fixed with the new patch. Low multiplayer numbers and originally missing pre-order bonuses that they now fixed. That's not the only game with problems, as Lost Souls Aside also acknowledged that the game has performance issues and claims to be working on the optimization issues to which they delivered on the start of September. I don't know if these patches fix the performance issues for anyone, because both games are still in the mixed category. If you noticed any changes after the patches, feel free to sound off in the comments. And in other news, I'm getting some alarm bells ringing in my head the moment I saw this tweet. Yes, these 4 are supposed to be women in the new James Bond game, and I couldn't tell that those were originally women in the first place. Gotta say though, I appreciate Ayakamod's jab at the game by saying, nothing that can't be fixed with mods. Now, this game did look good from what I saw, and even Insider Gaming is saying that it looks like just another Hitman game, even pointing out that they share the same studio, same engine, that is Glacier, and even the same visual palette and UI, with the only notable difference being instead of playing as Agent 47, you play as a British young man. And before somebody makes a mod that turns 007 into Agent 47. In other news, staff working at Firaxis have been laid off. The number of affected people is unknown, and this came from a LinkedIn post from Emma Kidwell saying, and I quote, I was affected by the layoffs at Firaxis and I am open to full-time writing work at your studio. I'm an incredibly adaptable writer who wrote the Civilization 7 and Marvel Midnight Suns during my nearly 5 years at the studio. I encourage you to keep an eye out for my former colleagues who were also laid off. 2K responded to RPS again, take this with a grain of salt, that it was about restructuring and optimizing its development process for adaptability, collaboration, and creativity. Now, let's hope this actually fixes the game, cause as you can see on Metacritic, the user score ain't looking too hot. And my tinfoil hat theory is that the layoffs are because of that. And now for a fun fact for you all, Bungie is desperate and is paying people 500 euros in gift cards to play Marathon for 1 hour daily for 30 days. They have to pay people in order to do something most people do for free if the game was interesting. Fun. This came from an email that select few received because they were interested in future research opportunities. Bungie will also collect feedback through short surveys and a weekly survey from participants. But not only that, there was a follow-up email confirming that they will be using their own internal environment. They asked people to send their IPs or VPN IPs and stick to that VPN so they can be added to their firewall allow list. This appears to be an invite only because there are no public signups for the playtests. And if you follow the link, you have to accept an updated NDA, so there won't be public knowledge about it, unless someone leaks it, of course. This whole situation doesn't bode well for the game, not in the slightest. Moving on, journalists are being journalists yet again. This Eurogamer journalist gave Hell Is Us a 3 out of 5 stars and called it an absorbing, nightmarish meditation on the horror of war. But diverse design choices prove tedious. Now, naturally, that would be fine to write, but let's dive deeper into the review. He starts off with how it's a masterpiece in design from the soundscape and overall tone of the game, and admits that most of the score comes from that. Fine, so far so good. After that, he wrote, and I quote, "Hell is Us is at times a mapless nightmare of obscure puzzles, confusing menus, and shallow combat that collectively is hostile to play." Which to me sounds like you either need to find a different job or actually become better at figuring out the landscape. He further proved my point by writing, "Hostility isn't a bad thing, especially for a game depicting such a combative, malicious world, but there's a fine line between cryptic and tedious that the studio doesn't always balance." And finished the whole thing off with, "But I believe it may prove too divisive for some," most likely referring to himself, but not willing to admit it. Now, if that was all, I wouldn't have spent time on this guy as much as I did, but this was all to paint a picture that this guy isn't one of those "I don't want to play hard games" journalists, but here's the cherry on top. He wrote about the story, and I quote, "The issue with the plot, though, it is Remy himself. Besides searching for his family, he prescribes to the boring white guy in a jacket school of protagonists. He barely speaks, despite being voiced by Elias Tofelix of Deus Ex fame, and rarely comments on his discoveries." To which this whole thing leaves me wondering, if the main protagonist is any other race, do you think he would have wrote the same thing? Maybe not, but this comes off as a very racist statement. Not to mention, it's not the place of the protagonist to comment on all of this. It's the place of the player to comment on all of this. Look at Kingdoms of Amalur. The protagonist was now voiced, and in your head you could say the most offensive things while selecting the option that could potentially point you to the most offensive things, and then, the two things tied together. But this guy's most likely not gonna get it. The only complaints so far that I can understand are the repetitive enemies later down the line. However, this isn't enough of an excuse to give a hard game 3 out of 5 just because you can't play it. Nor was it made for the audience you are part of. Also, if you're curious, here are the SteamDB charts as of the recording. Moving on, Lost Soul aside had internal drama, which allegedly hurt the reputation of the game in China ahead of its release. The controversy arose early in the year when a private chat log got leaked from a former developer and was spread online. The former developer boasted that the project can only be completed thanks to Yang Bing, director/producer of the game, and him basically dismissing contribution from other people. That's not all though. Narcissism wasn't the main cause, probably contributed a good portion of it though. The main cause is this quote: "When you lose 1 unit of sale from yellow people, you will receive 10 units of sale from black people." Which is a message that accused Sony of forcing political statements down people's throats. The director also didn't dispute these leaks, and he made a public apology on Sohu.com, admitting that it's his own failings in leadership and acknowledged that the remarks had caused harm and stress, that the employee in question had been dismissed last year. The apology didn't seem to do much, at least on the Steam front, with the game still sitting at 57% with a total of 3k peak player count and just above 500 players in the last 24 hours. Moving on, Ubisoft is refusing to share sales figures with an analytics firm. I want to point this out real quick. Tech4Gamers rubbed salt in the wound by reminding people that Star Wars Outlaws and Assassin's Creed Shadows couldn't be as successful as Ubisoft wanted. On Blue Sky, the executive director of Circana Matt Piscatella confirmed that Ubisoft stopped sharing data with them. I also don't need to tell you this, because the article already did it for me. They wrote that Ubisoft can control the narrative by hiding sales figures and just label the next game's performance as good, even though recent titles show that it performed poorly. And if I can put my tinfoil hat again real quick, considering they stopped sharing the data, they most likely are gonna do that. Moving on, Trails in the Sky First is being censored as shown in the demo. Yikes! The game's remake is coming out next month and it has a demo out for a week. Gung Ho's localization team did promise a faithful recreation of the Japanese script, however some of the Japanese lines were also changed for being, and I quote, problematic. The changes are on screen, and honestly, I'm against it. The original isn't even problematic whatsoever, especially if the translation is accurate. This smells like classic censorship. I mean, hell, this is classic censorship. On top of that, they promised to stay faithful, yet here we are, changing the original source material. So much for being faithful. Whoever is responsible for the translation needs to rethink their life choices at this point. Especially if they're offended by a fictional conversation. Some people... And in some good news, Shift Up kept their promise and confirmed the sequel for Stellar Blade is in development. This is a few weeks, and yes, weeks, after the company announced its intentions to make a sequel. Damn, those lads are moving fast! As their most AAA developers. This came from the financial report, which was translated by Genki_JPN on Twitter, saying, "We are actively pursuing the franchise development of the Stellar Blade IP and are currently developing a sequel to Stellar Blade. The sequel will inherit the action-packed nature of the original Stellar Blade while incorporating an expanding worldview and enhanced gameplay, further solidifying its position as a franchise IP. We anticipate that this will result in even greater success than the original." The article also reminded people that the sequel is intended to be released by 2027, but I don't know how long that will hold, with this year only having 3 months left, but hey, more power to them if they think they can make it by then. Well, might tell them don't do it. Moving on, Tekken 8 finally fixed their female models. A while back, I talked about how people disliked it in one of my videos, and now, in patch 205, they made adjustments to the female models. Katsushiro Harada showed a GIF showing the difference between the .04 and .05 models, and also showing Asuka, making her look more like a woman now than a man. He also wrote, "Applying major corrections all at once would have caused significant model instability, particularly when factoring in customization options, so the adjustments have been limited to incremental refinements involving the shoulders, upper arms, and neck, meaning there might be more changes to the models coming in later patches." Now, normally this is where I would have left things off, however, there's always one single individual that does something funny. Mill over here wrote, "A patch about fucking tits? Are we a joke to you?" To which Harada just fired back with a Tekken tweet and wrote, "Can't you read this?" with a balanced patch notes alongside those model changes. Absolute cinema! Moving on, the former Devil May Cry game director Hideaki Itsuno isn't making his dream games because, and I quote, "they won't sell." In an interview with Famitsu, the director confirmed he's directing the new project that was pitched by him personally and was accepted without major revisions by the company. But when he asked whether this means he is making the game he always wanted to make, he replied with, "Strictly speaking, no. I think the kind of games I'd most like to make probably won't sell. They'd be too out there to be judged as commercially viable. I am well aware of this myself, so instead I extract specific elements from those game ideas and combine them with elements I know from experience will work. That's how I'm building our new title. This For me, it's honestly sad because he knows what he's doing. He improved on the Devil May Cry formula so much, and without him, I believe the franchise would have been dead in the waters after the second game. And if I'm understanding everything correctly, this man was practically convinced by Capcom that his projects weren't worth the time and effort because he had it. Whenever I'm asked to propose new projects, I usually submit 5 or 6 ideas and mix in about 2 that I really want to do, but they never get chosen. I really would be curious to know what those ideas were that never got chosen, but we may never find out. And real quick before we move to the next topic, over 50% of the job cuts in the video game industry are in California. This was one of the topics on a game business video with Amir Sadvat, who is a Tencent gaming business executive. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't trust Tencent as far as I can throw them, especially since articles like this one are still up. Sure, the information is probably correct, but that doesn't change my opinion on the guy. And now back to Tekken North, as the creator was found promoting a game where players crossed the Texas border to terminate a pregnancy. Now that's not a sentence I ever expected to say, but here we are. This discovery was made again by Gothic Therapy, and their video will be in the sources too. Go check that out. At the Games Developer Conference, Reyes gave a speech about her approach to game development. Instead of focusing on mechanics and designs, she focused instead of value-driven storytelling. And telling the audience that games should be used to, quote, shift hearts and minds, to serve as tools for activism. And mental illnesses, probably. Man, imagine being so blind to what gamers actually want that you have to shove your deranged ideas in the gaming industry. Oh, and also the slider shown at her presentation showed she's connected to Wings Interactive. Not surprising to say the least. She showed her involvement in organizing a Justice Jam, which is centered around projects with, quote, justice in mind. You'd think that would involve some sort of detective-based games, I don't know, superhero games, or anything related to the law, but nope. Instead, it's modern politics shown by one of the games that she praised called Crossing Lines. The game, as the article pointed out, was blunt and it tasks the player to drive a teenage sister across the Texas border illegally in order to terminate pregnancy in another state. I still can't believe I spoke that out loud. Hope the neighbors aren't listening. Gothic Therapy also connected the dots, highlighting that this GDC talk as future proof of a pipeline of activist influence in gaming and provided a breakdown. Reyes' alignment with Wings Interactive, whose co-founder Audrey LePrince publicly promoted Tekken North. The involvement of Sweet Baby Inc. co-founder Kim Belair, who appeared as a junior and organizer for the Justice Jam, confirms Sweet Baby Inc.'s role in helping push these kinds of projects. And I'm using projects here loosely. These deranged mental deficiency simulators, more like it. But anyways, Ray's own admissions that she seeks out, quote, alternative sources of funding to keep these games alive, rather than relying on traditional gaming investors. I wouldn't be surprised if they make or promote another game about crossing the border. Hell, it even feels like the border here is just a metaphor for them wanting to be part of the mainstream games in order to more effectively promote their shit of a message. But that's just me speculating. Moving on, PayPal is reportedly closing accounts of gamers buying adult games and keeping profits of adult game developers. This came from a Reddit post a while ago from r/lootgames by the user Gojo_Majima, where they received an email from PayPal stating that their account was permanently limited, and sadly it wasn't a scam like they thought. They even showed their history with the PayPal account, and it's only showed purchases from itch.io, and that's not the end of it. Steam's Visa, MasterCard, and censorship fiasco just keeps getting worse. Wasn't expecting to see this from Polygon, but here we are. The developers behind the adult game Heavy Hearts say they were recently informed that their application for Steam Early Access was rejected by Valve because the company could no longer support the model of games with, quote, mature themes. The developers behind a fantasy RPG called The Restoration of Aphrodisia also got a similar email from Valve, even though for now there is nothing in Steam's documentation that prohibits this type of content from early access. Nothing, at least as of recording, though. Now, here's the thing as well. Mind you, this is gonna factor into the next story. And I quote, legality is no longer the defining factor, is a quote that came from Kathleen Roper, which just that these activists don't care what people actually want. They just want their narrative to be at the top and the only one accepted. Now, what does that mean for the gaming industry? Well, think horror genre next on the chopping block, where you can't have jump scares because it causes a heart attack in the elderly, and the government could ban those games saying, we're doing this to protect the elderly. Yeah, sounds ludicrous, I know. Just look at what timeline we live in, for crying out loud. Idiocracy is in full swing. Bottom line, anything, no matter what it is, if it's legal, it should be available to the public, regardless of what activists think. And I'll die on this hill. And as I said, that's not all, since we're tying the previous story into this one. As once again we have Collective Shout, and they just can't stop, and it seems they won't stop. According to them, we're all abusers in real life for trying to defend our freedom of expression. Oh god! These delusions are giving me psychic damage. Now, remember the previous statement, legally not being a factor? Well, that came from this gem of an interview. You can even see in the statements that Roper makes. It's always about games this, games that. As far as I'm aware, she never even mentioned trying to protect women in real life. It's just about censoring what she doesn't like. While reading this article, I also noticed this statement from her, and I quote, I would ask those who view the loss of their raid games as censorship to consider if they are as concerned with women's basic human rights and the glorification of male violence against women. Which is so fucking ridiculous, cause she just specifies male violence against women, not the other way around. Talk about fucking double standards here. Not to mention, by her logic, let's get rid of Game of Thrones because there's incest in that. How does that sound? But anyway, I digress. Not only that gem of a statement was made, but these journalists that posted all of this are not presenting the other side properly. They just left us high and dry by writing that we are just upset. This whole thing feels like Tweaktown glazing hard the activist group without thinking about the consequences of what could happen. All the questions at the bottom are just about collective shout this, women that, collective shout that. With the only question that critics actually pointed out is, and I quote, critics argue this removes agency from women creating or consuming adult content. How do you reconcile protection with freedom of choice? And this gem of a human being replied with what basically amounts to discarding the question and asserting her ideological view with no pushback whatsoever. Typical Karen activist answer, if you ask me, especially when one of their kind finds resistance to their mental degeneracy. But anyway, that's all for this week. Again, if you like the content, hit the like and subscribe buttons, and I'll see you next week.